Hello and welcome to another episode of AB Talks, where we dive deep into the trends and challenges facing industries across the Middle East and around the globe. Joining us today, we have Dr. Sonia bin Jaafar, the Chief Executive Officer of the Abdulla Al Ghurair Foundation for Education. Thank you, Dr. Sonia, for joining us here on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me, Anup.
It's a pleasure to have you here. Dr. Sonia, while the business of education seems to be doing well, there are questions that are being raised around the quality of education. Is this a concern within the Middle East? And if so, what impact is it likely to have on businesses, industries, and economies in the Middle East?
Well, it's absolutely a critical issue in the Middle East, but also globally. Educational inequality has been on the rise with the unfortunate pandemic. And unfortunately, there's a lot of vulnerable groups that have not been getting their education. And so in terms of the Sustainable Development Goal 4, we have been going a little bit backwards with the progress on that. And so one of the things about that is that it's an opportunity cost. So we know that nations with higher percentages of graduates actually have higher economic growth. So it's actually quite an opportunity cost, which is why you have industries like the World Bank investing since 2000. They've invested $73 billion in education in developing countries because they know that that is the kind of sustainable impact investing that we can have. And so when you look at what's happening with the job market and the future in the industries, we look to the future and we know that there's automation, we know that there's sustainability, and we know that we've had a COVID-19 recession. And so the combination of that has meant a very big disruptor multiplier effect. And so when we look at 2025, the predictions were that 85 million jobs would be lost and shifted by 2025, but 97 million would be created. We're expecting that. But the distribution of what those jobs will look like will be quite different. And we need to be able to have the right kind of talent for those future-facing jobs, or industry will suffer.
Speaking about the right kind of jobs for future-facing jobs, in your words, we have moved away from a linear form of education where we used to work, study, we used to work and then retire. Now we are seeing some sort of a continuous form of education where we study, we work, we go back to study, thanks to virtual environments, thanks to Zoom education, thanks to online formats of education. Is there a need for industries within the Middle East to focus more on upskilling and reskilling to bridge employability gaps, if any, within these industries?
Absolutely. We are, first and foremost, I don't think that it's a bad thing that we have moved into this new model of education for life. And if you're more mature in your career and you've done well, you look back on it and you know that, in fact, you have had a habit of upskilling yourself, of keeping up, of what are the new trends in my industry, and how do I learn something new to keep myself essentially relevant. And so that's not new, but what is new is that now, with the rapid pace of how things are changing, we're looking at the new skills, and depending on who you listen to, a new skill that we learn today has a half-life of anywhere between 3 to 5 years. And so now, if you think of a 4-year degree program and think of that half-life, it gets a little scary, because by the time you graduate, what you learned, I'm not talking about the transferable skills, those core soft skills, the critical thinking. I'm talking about the other kind of skill sets. And that's why upskilling is so critical. And it's just become more critical recently. And we absolutely need knowledge workers now more than ever. And in this region, in the Levant, we know that 2/3 of the youth have reported that they don't feel ready. And that's unfortunate, because we have 30% of the graduates who don't have the digital skill set. And so you combine all these statistics and you get to the point where, how are we going to source the talent that we need for the future of work? And it's not just about, banking industry now, or about, EdTech, or, whatever it is that's coming up, the hospitality and how they're integrating it. But it's also about the next generation of the industry. So VR, for example, I think Goldman Sachs predicted that by 2025, the VR industry would be an $80 billion industry. So who's going to work in that industry if we don't upskill, if we're not ready for it? And I think that those are the kinds of things that we need to be ready for.
How important is education technology? Because if I could use the analogy, one of the few rays of sunshine that have pierced the gloom of COVID during the past 2 years in 2019 and 2020 has been the scaled up adoption of EdTech. Are you seeing an impact in terms of people's lives in the adoption of education technology in the Middle East?
For certain, I have, and it is a critical piece of a puzzle. And right now, what I'm noticing is that everybody's running to EdTech, but it is just one of many solutions, and it actually needs very big infrastructure for it to work and operate, especially if we're looking at educational inequalities. It's funny because we've just released an outcomes paper at the Abdulla Al Ghurair Foundation for Education with Save the Children and EdTech Hub that's funded by the World Bank. And what we were looking at specifically in that case was refugee education, and it's called high, low, or no tech. And one of the outcomes of the conversation where His Excellency Abdulla Al Ghurair was leading, what he found and talking to all of the other experts in the room was that, in fact, all three modalities are needed because it's context-based. And we need to strengthen tech infrastructure and partnerships and collaboration. But now you take refugee education, which is targeting a particularly vulnerable group, and you just think of that in terms of everyone. There's always vulnerable groups everywhere, and we do need to look at all three modalities, and we do need to strengthen the infrastructure. So it's not a single solution, and that's one piece of it. The other piece of it is we need to use EdTech to reimagine education rather than taking the face-to-face experience or the classroom experience that people know and trying to reproduce it online. And when we get to that point, then we'll have an amazing breakthrough. But for now, what we're seeing is not enough innovation. And this might go back to we need more talent to be able to drive that innovation. In terms of what's happened in the last 2 years, it's been incredibly interesting because it's almost been an accelerator effect. People were ready, universities were ready, they had the technology, but they weren't ready with their human capital. Mm-hmm. And so that got accelerated. And so there's been a change management piece around it. And all of that means that we need to do things differently.
If I could end this discussion on a more personal note, it's come to my attention that you're the chairwoman of the Global Council of UN SDGs in the UAE as well. In your role as the chairwoman of the Global Council of UN Sustainability Development Goals in the UAE, what would be your message to the future workforce, to this youth, to youth leaders, in terms of climate action and sustainability and the impact that that can have on businesses?
Well, thank you. So the Global Councils on SDGs was established in the 6th edition of the World Government Summit. And it's kind of exciting because we're about to have the 8th edition coming up. And it was honored to be nominated for term 2 and to be selected. And we're really excited because there's so many opportunities for youth. We have the SDG Youth Leaders Program. COP28 is being hosted in 2023. And these youth leaders are being invited to Egypt, and then they're going to be present. So I expect great things from them. We have the Youth for Sustainability program in Masdar, which has sustainability ambassadors. There's so many opportunities. I think that if youth really just found what it is that they want to change because they're unsatisfied with it. When we look at, what kind of climate action do they want to be a part of? When we look at what kind of SDG they want to contribute to. So in terms of my chair, what we're looking at is a nexus model between SDG 4, which is education, 8, which is decent work, and 17, which is partnerships. And we're super excited because we're launching a new initiative called NOMU, which means growth in Arabic. And we're incubating this partnership model where industry, government, and educators are coming together to actually help and build better pathways from learning to upskilling to jobs and going back in that circle, like you had said. And I think that there's so many opportunities out there, and all we need is really for the youth to engage and go forward, because they have great ideas and may not know how to communicate them or know how to get them out there in their own industries, or even know which industry to go to, because there are multiple industries where they can make a difference. And what I would advise is that find your purpose and engage deeply in your life. Don't let it pass you by. Figure out what it is that you care about most, and then try and be true to your culture. The Arab culture is about giving. It's about giving to our families, our communities, and trying to help those who didn't have whatever fortune we had, and trying to help others. If you can embed sustainability into everything you do, I have great hope that we will be able to resolve some of our issues and just have a better future.
Embed sustainability for a better future and to protect the planet. That's a wrap on this episode of AB Talks. Thank you for joining us here on the show today as well. Don't forget to comment, like, share, and subscribe below for more such videos with experts in the industry. Thank you, Dr. Sonia, for joining us here today.
Thank you for inviting me.
A pleasure.